their seats, please. The chair will call to order the Board of Education, Community Unit School District 201 meeting today, May 8th, 2012. Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Ms. Caparelli?
Here.
Mr. Charleston? Mrs. Charlton?
Here.
Mrs. Hancock?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here. If everyone could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item is, are there any public comments? Okay. Then the chair, there will be a short closed session first. The chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing a student discipline issue. So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
And we will be back out to resume the meeting after the closed session. The board has returned to open session. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Any questions or comments? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Number 1, personnel recommendations. Number 2, first reading of the student handbook revisions.
So moved. Second?
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Before we go on, one of the things that the board has done tonight is we have accepted the resignation of Mr. Steve Carr. We would like to, or I would like to say that we thank you to Mr. Carr for your 10 years of service to District 201. The Sentinel community certainly has valued your input for these years. The nice thing is that Mr. Carr will be still collaborating with District 201 as he's taking the position of the principal at the Technology Center of DuPage on July 1st. So thank you and good wishes. Okay, then the next item is a action item. Board action on student discipline issue. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the administrative recommendation in the student discipline matter as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Ms. Caparelli,
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton,
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock.
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Okay. Approval of asbestos abatement change order. Do we want to talk about that? Does anybody have any?
Can you just tell us why?
Yeah.
Sure. It's a situation where originally we're looking, it's for the ceiling tiles in the media center at Manning, and initially we're hoping to have some of our own people trained who would be able to assist us with that. And it's just the timing of the training and when we need to do this, and it's not going to work out. So it's more beneficial for us, keeps us on our timeline if we just have the company doing some of the other abatement and some of the other buildings do this as well. And it doesn't change our timeline at all.
Answered my question.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions on that? The chair will entertain a motion to approve the asbestos abatement change order in the amount of $33,600 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock.
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton,
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli,
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Okay, the next item is review and award of general contractor bid. Mr. Cashman, would you like to talk to us?
Thank you. I apologize for the one spreadsheet where the titles got clipped off. When I was emailing that to Kim, I did not even notice that until she went to post it. But I marked up your copies, so you should have those, and I'll explain those after I kind of review the bid recommendation letter. The scope of work, obviously, we have basically 4 buildings, Manning, Miller, the high school, and South School. There was one alternate bid related to the junior high for Wi-Fi. We put together bid documents and issued them on April 16th. And we basically had a drawing set of about 95 drawings, just under 1,000 specification pages for all the materials and contract requirements. We contacted a number of contractors that we've either worked here in the district successfully or that we've worked with as a firm successfully or are considered in the Chicago area top school contractors. So there were 13 contractors that we reached out to and let them know about the project prior to bidding. On the 17th of April, we had a mandatory pre-bid at J.T. Manning. We had an extremely high turnout. We actually had 27 general contractors show, which is a new high water mark for both the district and for me personally. I think it kind of reflects the economy. In some cases, I think a vast majority of these were coming to see what the project was all about, but in speaking with them, they either did not have the bonding capability or this was not their project expertise, so they chose to pass. One thing we handed out at that meeting, we also, after that meeting, we toured all the buildings with the bidders that were there and explained the scope of work with them, let them see the existing conditions. Mike walked that with me and then also made them aware of the steps they had to take in order to bid and pointed out specific contract requirements. One major contract requirements was a pre-qualification section that we added to the project manual for this project. Last year, we had some struggles with the low bidder where they really weren't providing the supervision we needed. And we really wanted to make the bar a little bit higher to make sure we had a really top quality contractor that had all the insurance requirements, the supervision capabilities, had the track record in public school work, and that they're capable of doing this work. We handed that out at the pre-bid meeting, and then that was required to be submitted a week later on April 24th electronically. We received by 3:30, we received 6 pre-qualification packages. Example of some things that were in there, they had to basically acknowledge that they have not paid liquidated damages, that they've been under the same corporate name and structure. In some cases, unfortunately, if a contractor has a bad history, they'll change their name and reconstitute themselves and come out, and it makes it really maddening. They also, we had requirements as far as them letting us know what their workman's comp rating is. So we had some idea of, their emphasis on safety, insurance requirements, a letter from their surety stating what their bonding capabilities were, because I could tell during the pre-bid meeting there were people just that couldn't be bonded on a project this size. They could maybe do $1 million project, but nothing like this. And in bonding, as I think I mentioned before, bonding's become more of an issue. The sureties are being much more conservative. So we received it from K.R. Miller Contractors, who I've worked with. They're an excellent contractor. Bergen Construction Corporation, Bowler Construction Company, Henry Brothers Company, Vengar Construction Corporation, and Blindman Construction Company. Of this list, Vengar has worked in the district twice in the past. They did the junior high renovation back in, I believe that was 08, and they also did the auditorium renovation at the high school in the past. We had the bid opening. Basically, throughout that bidding period, we answered questions. We had, I believe, 3 addenda that we issued where we answered contractor questions. At the bid opening, we actually had 5 contractors attend out of the 6, but we only received 4 sealed bids, and it was actually kind of a depressing thing to see. Vengar Construction was in the parking lot receiving electrical contractor numbers over the phone and did not have enough time to vet those numbers to where the point they felt confident in committing themselves to a bid. So they notified Mike and Kim and Kevin and myself that that was the case, and then just attended the pre-bid. We opened the bids and had basically 3 bids that were pretty tight together, and then one that was higher than the group. Bergen Construction's base bid was $3,128,000. Blindman Construction was $3,189,000. Henry Brothers was $3,156,000, and then K.R. Miller was $3,543,350. The attachments are the bid tab, which breaks out the base bid numbers, and then also the alternate bids and the unit prices. And then, as part of their bid form, they're required to break out their bid into basically by trade, and that's this other sheet, which is a schedule of value comparison. It's always interesting, especially when you see numbers this close together. We are happy with that because there's what's always terrifying is if you have a group of bidders and then one is significantly lower. You don't know if they're low because they made a big mistake or how they got to that. By going through the schedule of values, we're kind of able to see how they got to their bottom line. And it's actually interesting when you look at it because the low bidder in many cases was being beat by their competition on certain line items, but was able to prevail on the long run. You also, it's kind of telling if you look at the very top, overhead and profit, you could see which firms were the most hungry and were going at it when you compare like their profit line items. We sat down with the 2 low bidders. Since they were so close, if one's really far from the other, we'll meet with them and then decide whether to go to number 2. In this case, Mike and I decided to meet with both Henry Brothers and Bergen because their numbers were so close to see what was in common with their bids and what was separate. We basically went through all the line items on their bid, talked about how many bids they had per trade, were there people they knew, were there any kind of specific items that stood out. We wanted to make sure that they were going into this with their eyes wide open. They had no problems with the schedule, with the liquidated damages. There's basically, on the summer construction period, it's $2,500 a day if they're late. So that's per calendar day, and that's basically August 13th. And then for completing South School, there's $2,500 per day, and that's the end of October. And then basically roughly a month after they complete, like say the work at Manning, they have a final completion date, and that's to take care of any punch list work. So we'll go through it. When they say they're ready for a substantial completion inspection, we'll come, inspect the work, decide if they truly meet that requirement, document it, and then we'll basically give them a punch list of each trade. Is there something missing? Someone scratched the paint on a wall. It's usually small items like that. And then we have a $250 a day liquidated damages for the final completion. And we really, that's evolved over the years. We found that really helps them get the thing done. There's nothing worse than completing the project and then you have this punch list and it goes on for 6 months and you can't close them out. So there's that $250 liquidated damages. Neither one of the bidders had any issue with the schedule or with liquidated damages. One thing that stood out by Bergen Construction was the fact that our contract documents require a dedicated superintendent to be on the job anytime either their own workers or any subcontractors are there. They decided during the summer period to actually have 2 superintendents. They just feel like there's, with the multiple buildings, basically the 3 schools going simultaneously with the possible exception of the junior high, which they really wanted to have enough guys, and then basically once they get to August, they'll then go down to 1 superintendent. And we've reviewed the resume for the main superintendent. He actually lives in Lombard, which is nice. He's close by, and meets all the requirements. He has the 30-hour OSHA training, 10-hour OSHA training. Is quite a quality general contractor, and they spoke very highly of him. He's an expert in renovation work, and that's why they felt like this was a really good fit for them. We talked with Henry Brothers. If you look at the bid tabulation sheet, one big anomaly on the alternate bids was on 2 alternate bids, the HS3, which is basically the Wi-Fi at the high school, and JH1, which was a Wi-Fi system at the junior high. Everybody was, roughly in the same area, with the exception of Henry Brothers was significantly lower. And we talked to them about it. They said they were going to stand behind the number, but we really think there's something wrong with that number. In my estimation, it does not include even all the hardware that's required, let alone the installation. So we really don't recommend taking a bid that is so low that it could be troublesome, because they'd be looking for some way to make up that delta between them and where they need to be. Or it would not be a contract that actually meets the specifications. So Nancy has continued to look into the issue with the Wi-Fi. She has other proposals she's solicited, so she's investigating that. Basically, the overall budget that we presented back on March 13th was, this is for the contractor costs plus all owner costs. So the soft costs with the asbestos abatement, environmental fees, architectural fees, reproductions, builder's risk insurance, other items like that, was $3,264,209. Currently, assuming their base bid amount, our estimated total project cost would be $3,617,441, which is basically about $353,232 above where we want to be. We were not pleased with that. There's a couple things that we knew were costs that we hadn't originally taken into account, which was the additional cost for the abatement. And then we've basically carried some technology costs to do smart boards, both at Miller, Manning, and South, and those were costs we hadn't carried earlier. We have within the general contractor base bid amount a contingency of $290,000 is the owner's contingency, and then there's also a contingency in the window bid that you previously approved, which is $12,500. So we have over $300,000 of a contingency amount, which is your money and is really to spend if we find something that is not in the bid documents, buried in a wall. And our areas of risk are early on we do demolition at South, and then early on mostly at Manning. Miller's pretty straightforward. We have bid construction documents for it. The area on the second floor of Manning's kind of a concern, but once the abatement's done, they pull out the old science platforms. We'll know if there's anything hidden there that we're going to have to address. So our hope is, and what's usually the case, is that we'd be able to return most of that to the district. We also, in having these numbers trending higher than we would like, we've actually met and given ideas with Bergen on potential cost-saving items. An example is we looked at their line items and we saw that the resilient floor tile numbers were much higher than we had estimated. So we gave them another manufacturer's material that is a standard Armstrong resilient tile that's used in the district, and had them price that, and then that ended up being in excess of $20,000 savings. Still the same resilient tile, but a different manufacturer. Why the other prices were so high, we don't know yet, whether there was a shortage or just bad bids on the street. We currently have about $115,000 in cost-saving ideas that we would ultimately solicit proposals and actually reduce their contract sum by doing change orders. There's other ones, when we compare our original cost estimate with the current bid, The electrical numbers are trending higher than what we would have expected. So we're going to sit down with Mike and with Nancy and go through the power and data telecom to see if there's something in there that is superfluous and that we could eliminate without affecting the program at all, and then get that electrical number down closer to what we had originally estimated. With reviewing Bergen's number, we felt very confident that they had the entire scope covered, that they were confident with it. In comparison to the other contractors, I believe they were the most visible at the school during bidding, that they really got out here and saw the project. I know they were interested in this job. They've done a lot of work with our consulting engineers, AMSCO Engineering, and they had been asking them for a couple months, like exactly when this was going to come out on the street, because they really were interested. It was just right in their wheelhouse. Mike and I sat down, as I mentioned, with them. We, having that superintendent's crucial. Some other information here that was from a pre-qualification package. I mean, they've been around for 35 years. Their average annual construction budget is about $10 million. When they actually completed a very extensive listing of every job they've completed from 2012 back in time. Just looking back in the last decade, they completed over 45 public and private school projects. When I spoke with our engineers, Dan McCurdy, who's a mechanical engineer, he has a lot of experience with them. And what was interesting is they've done a lot of work for some private Catholic schools and a lot of repeat work. And obviously that does not need to be bid, it can be negotiated. So that really was encouraging me too, because if they were no good, they'd never get invited back. And this firm, Newman Architecture, has worked with them extensively with a lot of private Catholic schools. Their project sizes pretty much goes from about $300,000 up. The largest job I saw completed in the last decade was basically just under $6.8 million. Their insurance, their bonding, everything else seems to be perfect. We basically contacted a random sampling of references from that decade period, and everyone spoke very highly of them. They thought their superintendents were very engaged, very good communicators, both in schedule and with the project scope, and that they had a lot of talent as far as renovation work. On the alternate bids, basically, they're I mentioned initially the Wi-Fi and the reason we're passing on those. MN2 is basically a packaged natural gas generator for Manning. And you can see the range of numbers are basically in the 60s to low 70s. That number was higher than we had expected, and we're basically continuing to do some more research on that and did not feel that that was worthy to recommend at this point in time. I'll kind of walk through each of the alternate bids. The first one is basically doing some steam work. There's issues with the air handler in the gym at Manning, and to basically modify some steam heating on the south wall of the gymnasium. So that's the $16,000, or is it 18? $18,000 item. HS1 is basically the student and the staff main entrances at the high school. On the south and north side, there's a large series of doors there. They're existing from when the building was built. They're steel frames. They've basically been rotting out on the bottom because of salt use in the winter, and this is to replace the entire assembly with new aluminum frames, reinforced fiberglass doors, new door operators where there's handicap accessibility, and then also removing and reinstalling the door contacts that were done as part of your intrusion detection project from last year. HS2 is the boiler replacement. This is for the hot water heating boilers at the high school. There's basically 2 locations where those boilers exist, and this is replacing half of them. And basically coming in with, right now in each location, there's 2 boilers, coming back in with modular boilers, which are more efficient, and then using one of the existing boilers as backup so that you'd have the ability to have a redundant system. That number came in higher than we were hoping. We were more in the, I believe, 425. We do know in talking with the bidders that the control number for the building automation control system was higher than they thought it should be, and Mike and I have met with that vendor. You have a system, it's automated logic for the district, and we basically have already been talking with them about what's in the number and believe that will come down, so we know that line item would ultimately be smaller than the 508. HS3 was the Wi-Fi at the high school. HS4 is basically improving the air conditioning system in the server room at the high school. There's been issues there as your technology has grown. There's a Liebert unit at the north end of the server room, and this is providing ductwork in the server room to distribute the cooling, and then to relocate the condensing unit that's on the roof. It's currently between two large air handlers, and it does not appear to be able to get rid of its heat. So we're moving it to another location that's more wide open on the roof. S01 was an ad alternate for a operable panel partition at South School in the large conference room to allow the room to be split from one big room to like a 2/3, 1/3 scenario. And we just felt we're going to pass on that. SO2 is the AV room at South, which is at the lower level north area. With the district administration moving there, the room doesn't have any cooling currently, and with the servers and everything going into that room, that's the air conditioning, a Liebert unit in the room, and a condenser on the roof for that space. And then the final one, that JH1, was the Wi-Fi at the junior high. So we're basically recommending the five that are listed on page 6 of this recommendation letter, which would be a lump sum of $3,790,000, including those 5 additive alternate bids. And then, as mentioned here, that we would basically work with the general contractor after award to solicit cost reduction proposals and change orders to reduce the contract sum. And with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
The one question I had, you mentioned the 2 dates where the work was supposed to be done by, otherwise there's a fee associated with
Correct.
over or whatever. Was it August 13th?
August 13th for Miller, Manning, and the high school.
And that would also include the South Early Childhood?
South Early Childhood, there's just a smallest bit of abatement. There was a partition that you might be familiar with where they split that kindergarten room in half. We need to remove 2 rows of tile. So when the abatement contractors are done at Manning and Miller, they'll come over there, and I think it's a day's worth of work, and they'll remove that. And at that point, the room is ready to be painted, and we're basically painting. We're putting carpet tile down so we can leave basically conceal the asbestos tile that's in the room. We're doing marker boards, smart boards, tack boards, and then improvements in the 2 restrooms for the early childhood and first start room. So that would happen likely in late June or in July. So we'd be ready to move then the programs from Manning over there in July. And then South basically commences, I believe it's like August 20th that the general contractor would start at South, and I believe it's either 29th or 30th is a substantial completion date for South. And then the administration would move from those temporary classrooms where they'll be into that portion of the building.
I have a question on the schedule of values comparison. There's 5 allowances, 4
Correct.
allowances. So can you tell me again what the owner's contingency?
The owner's
is?
contingency is basically, on any renovation project, we carry this in our cost estimate, and we highly recommend it. You just don't know what you could get into, but it's your money. It can only be spent with the owner's discretion, and there are big areas of risk, though abatement's going to help us because they're kind of actually doing some demolition work prior to us getting in. The oldest portion of South, we have no drawings for it. We have no idea how it was built. And that would be basically for situations like that where there is a concealed condition that there's no way the contractor could know or we could know. The mural painting, we're choosing not to do that, but that was basically, we were carrying a number to do some murals at the library area at Manning and Miller at basically $3,500 a piece.
So that's in here?
It's in here, but it's something that we are considering possibly not doing to
taking
get
it
the,
out.
Okay, taking it out, okay.
It's a muralist that's done a bunch of work in the area, and we were actually put in contact with her by Karen and Rebecca. They had seen her work and really thought it was, appropriate for those student body, the student ages, and I believe she's done extensive work in 181.
Okay, but we're putting that up, okay, and then?
And Door Hardware Material Allowance is basically working with Anderson Lock, Smartboards. That was where I mentioned technology. We hadn't carried that in our budget before, But as we got into it and looked at the complexity of the schedule, we basically working with Mike and Kim and Nancy, the thought was to carry this to allow the installation of the smart boards at, I believe there's 8 locations, at Manning, Miller, and 2 at South for the early childhood program.
And is that for the new rooms and the
Correct.
library and all the new things that we put up?
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of it's just other technology needs to be able to move us to south. So there's
So
quite
that
a bit of additional, so
Okay, that's
somewhere,
in there. Okay.
yes.
Okay.
It's an allowance for the owner's use. If you decide to do it outside of the project, then we just ask the contractor to return the entire amount through a deductive change order.
Okay.
And then the final one, the door hardware allowance, is basically working with your, Anderson Lock has kind of been your standard hardware supplier, is basically working with all the hardware. That's furnished, but then the contractor is responsible for all the installation of the hardware, which is then included later in Division 8.
And then
And again, it gets adjusted at the end of the project.
Okay.
It's usually, we usually come in below that number and then do a change order to reduce that line item.
And then one more thing, the landscape restoration, is that at the high school? What,
Yes.
okay,
Yes, the high school, just because they're working outside the building, there could be a little bit where we're doing some HVAC work at Miller and at South, but it's predominantly the high school because they're cutting in 52 openings and they're going to be working inside and outside the building.
Right, okay.
So they had to carry something for them.
and one last question. We're talking about the smart boards. Does this also include in here for all the air conditioners
Yes.
that's in here?
Yes, actually, I thought I might have mentioned that. At Manning, we're adding a total of 13 new window air conditioners, and it's basically the contractor's responsible for removing the glazing. Instead of just propping, there's those, at that school, they're actually single-hung windows. We're removing the glazing, putting an insulated panel in the unit. The district is actually purchasing the window air conditioner because Mike can buy it for less than the contractor could. And then the contractor is responsible for installing, a window contractor is responsible for installing in the glazing. And then we've basically brought 220-volt power to each of the locations. So we have 13 at Manning. There's some existing classrooms, I believe because of SACID, that already have them, but we're adding 13 new. And then at Miller, we're adding 10 new. So basically, all the classrooms will have air conditioning at both those 2 schools.
Can I ask a question about the windows? This references, the bid recommendations, references that creating new masonry openings and installing 52 new Traco NX 3500 windows. But the bid we approved was for the installation and fabrication, right?
Right. That contractor, which is Auburn Corporation, becomes a subcontractor.
Okay.
Their contract amount, I believe it's $89,000.
And that number is rolled
It's
into
in here.
this one? Okay.
And actually then within the 89 is a $12,500 contingency.
Okay.
And we've already ordered the windows. They're in the production stream. We know we're not going to need that, so that would come back to the district, that $12,500.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Throughout the process, when these change orders and reductions come in, we'll just hear about them at the board meeting through an update or whatever.
Right, the board will approve those.
They all have to be approved, right? Okay.
I would think basically the main, other than the contingency, these main kind of cost reduction options that we've already investigated, there's some others that we want to investigate, so the thought would be kind of early on within the next month that we'd get to the bottom of most of those and then put those together into a deductive change order because we want to make them aware of exactly what scope we want to adjust or take out. So I think that would happen quickly, and then we would know as we get through the first phase of like Manning, Miller, and the high school, there really shouldn't be much, but Manning and Miller, if there's any unusual conditions we find, we'd be able to update you on the contingency there. And then once we get through demolition at South, I think we'll have a pretty good idea of where we're at. Because once we kind of open up the patient, we'll know what we might run into. So once all those ceilings are down, I mean, South is a really interesting one because, I mean, it was even very challenging for your environmental consultant, Kaplan, because you'll pop a ceiling open in one area and you'll see plaster, and you'll say, okay, it's plaster. But then you go over someplace else and it's gone. And there's no explanation for why, but I think once we get them all down, then we'll really be able to see what's going on in there. And we'll know then, probably in late August, early September, where we're at with that contingency.
So it's your recommendation that we pick up all of the alternate bids as well?
No,
Well done.
It's not,
Not all of them, just the 5 that are identified on page 6.
sorry,
and
thank you.
that's
And then on this spreadsheet, basically, just the ones that were highlighted in green.
Okay,
So it was basically the steam work at Manning, the doors, the student and staff main entrances at the high school, the hot water heating boiler replacement at the high school, the server room air conditioning improvements at the high school, and then the server room air conditioning at South School.
And in your board packet, in your orange folder, was an alternate project comparison spreadsheet. So those items, the first grouping of items that total $662,000, that's what we're recommending be included as part of this packet. And those things will be paid for out of the 2007 bonds, whether it's out of capital projects. Some of it may be able to be, we may be able to do life safety amendments. We're still kind of waiting on that because we also have the univents at South that are in the whole bid that we may be able to code some of that to the life safety, use up those bonds, and keep the new issue for other projects. So there will be some movement around, but I'll let you know exactly where we pay things from, so you know which pot of money it's coming out of. The other thing, and you can see those projects came in, unfortunately, $64,000 greater than we had anticipated. And that server room air conditioner, that was a new item that we added after we were looking at what we needed to do to be ready for South. And that's going to be important for our technology pieces, that we have that room properly air conditioned. But the boiler replacement, again, as Steve and Mike said, that difference, that $83,000, we're anticipating to go down. The other thing I wanted to just remind you of, and we approved this at a previous meeting, but Mike and I applied for a school maintenance operation grant for $50,000. That deadline to apply was May 1st, so I'm not sure how soon we'll hear about it, but if we get that money, then $50,000 will go toward the boilers, and I'm hoping that we get that. Then the other piece that we had identified early on from our summer projects, the next grouping totals $278,000 were the estimated cost. And right now, what we'd like to do is to, if under the revised estimate column, that's what we're looking at, things that we're projecting they're going to come in at, and we'd like the approval to go ahead with those items. Those were things that we recommended, and the board agreed that we should pursue, and now we've got some updated costs. The only thing, we're still waiting on the metal cap and flashing, so that's why that $37,000 is in shaded. And then the natural gas generator, we're still getting some estimates on that, but we anticipate it won't be higher than what's listed there. And then the internet access should be somewhere between that 66 and 75, but given that we had gone out and gotten some quotes a while ago, we're just trying to give a little bit of cushion, but we're hoping it still comes in at that 66. So we'd like the authority, if things come in at those ranges, that we go ahead to do those as well, in addition to the other projects.
And this, Kim, was, the capital improvement
Correct.
things that you had talked about before.
Yeah, and so this was just a summary, so you could see what we estimated the cost at, where we think we're going to ultimately be. So net looks like $38,000 over. So some came in higher, some came in lower. If we get that grant and we the controls come down, we should hopefully be under there.
On the controls at the high school, as part of that 508, the first initial number that we saw from Automated Logic, I believe, was $55,000. And Mike and I met with them, reviewed it, made sure that there were a couple panels that were existing panels, and we want to make sure he was going to try to reuse those versus just replacing the panels. And I believe the revised number was 46?
46 houses.
Was around 46, so we already know there'll be some savings there. There was also, he was carrying some costs for training, a lot of training costs that were, if you had just got this, you went from pneumatics to digital controls, and you were starting from the ground up, where we went through with Mike and on what his knowledge of the system and how much training he wanted, and then we know there's some savings there too. So the 508 hopefully would go down at least that delta that we've seen between the 55 and the 46.
This is probably the optimal time to do these alternates, right? Because the work is already being done, and is that a fact? Is that accurate?
Correct. I mean, you have all the trades here. The high school, I mean, they're older boilers. I mean, they're from the 80s.
Yes, 82.
And, I mean, you have multiple boilers. I mean, you could lose one and still limp along, but with this replacement, you would have enough heat to totally operate the school. Things don't seem to be trending down. I mean, right now, we're starting to see material shortages because everyone basically went to kind of zero inventory with the recession. So now we're kind of ramping back up. So I'd be surprised if they would ever be cheaper than this.
So, question, Kim, on the sheet that you have here for us, the alternate project, are all of these that 14?
Yes.
That is all of that's coming out of the 2007 bond money?
Right. Part,
Okay.
some life safety, some work.
Some life safety, some, so then what we're approving is this 3,790 minus 914? Or, I'm sorry, if I'm doing big picture,
No, I think
So-
that the 3,790 was,
Includes-
was that everything, Steve?
Yeah, that's the base plus those
Plus
5
all the
alternates.
plus these 5 at the top,
Right.
right?
I mean, imagine what I know Kim's done in the past is you'd code the portion that's in the bond money to one fund and code the alternates to another. And we can track it on the schedule of values and the applications for payment, so you
And
know
it's more
exactly
or
what
less
they're-
just me on a separate Excel spreadsheet keeping track of which pot of money that
Okay.
they're coming out of.
So just because we had money left over from 2007
Right.
project, so that's all that. And then, so now we've gone for the bond money, the 2012 bond money. So, am I understanding this, there's still money left? Because we're talking about going up to 5 million?
We can issue 5 million.
But what I'm saying, we
yes.
can go up to 5 million because
Correct.
the next phase is to talk about
Right.
early
Right.
childhood, so.
Right.
And I know, I didn't ask this before, and so 3,790 includes some money from the bond, from the 2007 bond?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you. Great. Can we all get hard hats to watch some of this work?
Absolutely. I mean, we'll be basically, we hold a weekly owner-contractor architect meeting. It usually runs from 2 to 4 hours. We'll, initially during the summer, I believe we're going to be setting them up in Manning as their headquarters. They won't have a construction trailer, they'll be in the school. And then once they complete the summer work, they'll move to the basement of South and be more than happy. It's definitely worth seeing during construction. If you just give it a heads up so we make sure we have enough hard hats, but it would be worth seeing it. You know, like the second floor is going to be a total change at Manning. I mean, you're taking an area that's been there since it was a junior high, and, you know, it's all those casework that's been, you know, basically abandoned in place. They'll all be gone. Now you're going to have 2 nice big classrooms that can really be a plus there. Miller is going to change dramatically. You're going to take the library out of a, you know, what was a storage space into a larger space with a direct connection to a computer lab. And it's going to be a big change. It's going to be interesting.
Does any, this is kind of a PR type question, but does anybody take like before and after? We planning on doing that so we have some sort of?
We have thousands
I'm sure you have lots of
photographs, and we take, the contractor's required to take photographs every week, and then we do also, and we've done some interesting slideshows where you kind of take the same space and show it in time, and we could put something like that together to show you. Because it's interesting to see the process. I mean, it's a lot of work. I mean, it's 50 days. I mean, it's a lot of work. What's nice is, I mean, a firm like this is Bergen. I'm really excited to work with them. I think I might have mentioned it, but I went back to see, because the name was ringing a bell. They've bid repeatedly at New Trier, just have never been low. They've bid repeatedly at the Barrington School District, a series of schools, and just haven't been low. They were actually bid last year, which I had kind of forgotten, and saw, and they came in fourth. It was a tight bid, but they're a good firm, and excited to have them. But we could do a nice slideshow to show you the whole process, because at all locations, the high school is going to be fascinating. I think it's really going to be something when people see the first series of windows cut in, even before there's a window, before they get a piece of plywood on, so it's going to be totally different. And that's going to be a really, I think when we did the rendering, you kind of see it's just solid walls right now, and it looks so different when Mike took all the bushes out. But I think once you start seeing those windows show up, it's going to be a totally different environment for the teachers and for the students. So I'm excited to see that.
That brings up a good point. That might be a nice thing for us to have at the board meeting, but also in the individual buildings, like when they have their open house or something, just to show those things.
Yeah. Even thinking like a slideshow, even on the website or something. So
Absolutely.
people can see where their tax money is going and what we're doing with it, and the educational spaces that are being improved with this.
We could certainly do that. We could select and basically take, different project areas and have a whole series of pros over time, like in a time-lapse photography, basically.
I will say there was a high school student I ran into, and she said, well, now that we're getting the windows, I have nothing else to complain about.
That's a good
She doesn't live in my house, but that was something that was said, so. All right. We ready to, let's get all our stuff in. The chair will entertain a motion to award the general contractor bid for summer 2012 projects to Bergen Construction Corporation of Palatine, Illinois, as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the strategic plan, and we should all have that in front of us.
Well, just that, the strategic plan is attached, and upon approval, will get posted on our website. But, and I'd like to thank all of our community members who were involved in the process. It was definitely a long process, but I think a worthwhile process. And we had a lot of community involvement, which I think is reflected in the plan. And even some of the elements, even as we were developing the plan, we were focused on, if you look at the facility plan, dovetails nicely with the projects we're doing. We're already having our initial meeting on, I think, May 22nd to start to develop our curriculum advisory council. So some of those things are already taking place as we're adapting the plan.
In the student advisory part of that, I guess I was looking for the small giant information that I felt I know I wasn't part of the strategic plan per se, and I was looking for the small giant information. It's not actually in this proposal. Would it be in the advisory?
Right. I mean, it's the what we've been talking about in terms of our vision for our district. It's dovetails with the strategic plan, and so it definitely supports our vision. And then as we develop those elements of the strategic plan, that's when the vision kind of comes to life, and you start to see those elements.
Kevin, do you anticipate, I think one thing that's always nice to do once you get one of these types of documents is then it gets kind of woven into the evaluation process for administration and staff, so that the types of goals and objectives that go into an individual's evaluation actually relate directly back to particular goals from the strategic plan. So I know we're talking a lot about evaluations and things changing, but I think that's a real important component. If this is going to be your guiding light, that it shines on everything we do, including the evaluation process.
Right. That'll occur also, ties to the school improvement plans will also occur with the strategic plan. You should see that alignment. And then also, just in terms of the accountability piece, periodically, reports will be made to the board in terms of progress in light of the strategic plan. So all those things will follow.
Are they made in a format that it's easy to tie back to this original document? Sometimes, when you have follow-up, say, it's hard to connect A to A and B to B, and...
No, we'll make that effort to
Okay.
make sure that
Okay.
that is easy to see.
Okay.
I think I know the answer to this, but once this is approved, then this will be a document that we would have up on our website.
Right.
And just because of the amount of work that went into it, can we put this out on a blog so that people, not just that it's there, but that we invite people to look at it, and especially for the amount of, the number of people that worked on this?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Chair will entertain a motion to approve the strategic plan as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes. And again, I would second that. Thank you to so many people that showed up and gave a lot of their time for that, so.
Including the superintendent,
And
the
I was
business
just-
manager, and the principals and staff,
Teachers,
and yes, people we don't thank as much as we maybe should, but.
It was truly a collaborative venture. Okay, and then the approval of the WCMA negotiated agreement, Westmont Custodial Maintenance Association agreement. Any questions?
Well, Mike Nellis is here tonight, so, and we're very happy to say that we have a contract for you tonight. And also in your packet was the salary appendix, and it just shows that the salary schedule for the 11-12, so this year was the same as the 10-11, so they took a pay freeze, and then for 12-13, those are 2% increases for next year.
Any questions? All right, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the Westmont Custodial Maintenance Association negotiated agreement as presented.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
All right, the next item on the agenda is a discussion item, guidelines for elementary school students new to CUSD 201.
Right, and I think, this past fall, we gave families the option of attending Miller from the Manning Attendance Center if they wanted to. And we did have, and I kind of summarized it for you, we did have 8 students who did take advantage of that option. And of those 8 students, 2 are actually in the 5th grade, so those students are going to be transitioning to our junior high. Of the remaining students, 4 of the students are in 5th grade, will be entering 5th grade, and then 1 is entering 3rd grade. The other student is 4th grade, so that's where the other young man. And the 3rd grade is a sibling, and so it was a new family to the district, and so they were allowed to go as a family. And 2 of the students that did make the move are actually monolingual. We're used to bilingual. They're actually monolingual. They're Spanish-speaking only. And so for those families, the thinking is, and it's kind of interesting in talking to the principals, the decision to make the move wasn't necessarily based upon the size of the classroom as much as looking for an opportunity for the student to have a fresh start. In some cases, maybe some conflict repairs, that type of thing. And so it was just an opportunity to have a fresh start, and it did work out well for those students. And so those students, because we will have the additional sections of 4th and 5th grade, if they chose to return back to Manning, they would have that option. And to date, nobody has communicated that. I think the families are content with Miller. And then for the upcoming school year, then I think our work, if the board more or less directed me to kind of take a look at guidelines for how are we going to handle enrollments and between the two buildings. And so I think that part of that process will develop some guidelines for what do we do this upcoming fall, and do you continue that process, or do we allow students to attend their attendance centers, and then as we start to hit those benchmark numbers, then we'll have some protocols in place how we'll address those. And some of it obviously will be timing, depending upon when that occurs. If it happens in October, how we would address it is different than if it happens in July. So we'll develop those protocols for the board to have and to review.
I actually had a parent come to me. They had put their house on the market in Blackhawk Heights, and they told me the real estate agent told them that if the new family comes in, those students have to go to Miller. I mean, that's not...
No, that's not...
Okay, because that was one of the reasons. And then the other question I had revolves around the busing. So we have 8 students that went. I don't know how many we're going to have next year, but we paid for a special bus route for these students. Will we be, I mean, that's acceptable? That's what we want to do? I mean, it was $20,000, right? Is that, I don't remember saying that's what we were going to do. We had talked about trying to find some incentives for them. And I was thinking, as I was the one who said it, I was thinking more along the lines of, reduce school fees. I just, $20,000 seems like a lot to me for busing, and I didn't know how everybody else felt about that. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this topic to the board tonight.
Sure. And you're right. There's a cost to the transportation, and there could be some families who choose to return back to Manning, but at the same time, I think there is, it's again that cost benefit. I mean, the students who made that transition, and again, in some cases, were for other than the class sizes, and it's been a good move for them. They've been successful. They're doing well. Socially, they're doing well. And so it's, I think that also becomes part of that.
Sure.
When we consider that.
Okay.
Well, the one thing I wanted to ask, and I guess, some of these questions came up when we were talking about this last time, was just so that we are clear to our community that as of right now, our boundaries are the same as they were before. So if a family moves into the Miller neighborhood, they're in the Miller school, and if they move into Manning, they're in Manning school.
Right.
So they're not being told they have to go to either or school.
Correct.
They're moving into the boundary. Okay.
And they're not being given an option either. I mean, it's,
Right,
you move into to this boundary, it's that school you go to. Okay.
But did you mention that in the summer that may be, once we start discussing the enrollment numbers, that we may rework that? Is that what you just said?
What I said was that, again, when we develop our guidelines for, and I believe the board is looking for not only for, maximum sizes, but also minimum sizes as well. So develop those guidelines, and part of that process, also coming to the board then is not only what those numbers are, but also then, okay, when do you reach a point where you collapse a section? When do you reach a point where you open a section? So that has to be part of it. And then also part of that as well is, okay, so you're not quite at that point where you open a section, but are there some options for addressing it?
Right, okay.
And so I think that's where, when do you, again, say to families, hey, you have that option, or new families will attend a different building.
Okay.
But I think that's, again, part of that, looking at those numbers. And the problem is, I don't think you ever have exactly, and sometimes, again, it's a timing issue. In October, you hit that threshold, whatever it is. Okay, so how do we address this as a district? And may only be till the end of that school year, and then that permanent solution kicks into place.
Yeah, so just so then over the summer, we'll talk about those guidelines, which again are, at least we'll be having that conversation. And then I think you said at the next meeting, you'll be bringing, the next board meeting, you'll be bringing to the board your cost summation
Right,
of what we had
right,
approved before.
right.
Okay.
And then also, just to share with you as well, I had a brief conversation with Laura Riley, the WTA president, and offered to have WTA representatives part of that process of developing guidelines as well. So that they'll be part of that process
Great.
as well. So.
That's great. Okay, anything else on that? All right, then the next item, superintendent's report.
Well, I think in terms of facility planning update, I think Steve Cashman did a wonderful job. But just to kind of keep the, Mike is starting to do a tour of the buildings, and Monday he met with the high school staff. I believe tomorrow he's meeting with Manning staff. And just helping to answer questions because, because I think we're all feeling that time crunch, right now, and so the staff as well. So the staff is looking for, okay, so exactly how much is my life going to be impacted by this, and what do I need to make sure I do before I leave for the summer? Kim's been taking orders from buildings for boxes so that the proper number of boxes will be available for staff to do this. And then I know at the high school, our NHS students, they've been offered service hours if they're willing to help with teachers packing, with moving boxes, those types of things. So we're going to try to make it as painless as possible as we can, and communicate to the staff on a regular basis so that they know what to expect.
I know that both Manning and Miller, I think both are looking for the PTO help with the library on that account.
Yeah.
So, I know that's word out there, but if anybody has a couple hours to spare helping boxing up those books at the library, PTO, both of the PTOs are kind of helping with that, so.
I just have one other thing on the facility piece. As far as the next portion with South and early childhood, we should probably get some sort of idea of a timeline for that so that we know, because I know it's going to be much earlier than this one, because hopefully if there is any kind of student programming changes or anything like that, full-day kindergarten, any tuition-based type of things that the district may consider implementing, parents need to know that probably by January.
Right.
So they know what the building is going to look like and this sort of thing. So we'd have to be 6 months ahead of where we're at now for that. And it's a much smaller piece, I know, than what we're doing this summer. But it is, I'd like to see some sort of timeline, just so we know when to expect that kind of.
We've been working with Steve Cashman on that, so we have a tentative one, but I was trying to get through
Right.
tonight first, and then we'll start.
This is for, I'm not
Yeah.
saying anytime like right now, but,
Yeah, no, but we've
couple of
already
meetings.
been working with him on those pieces, working with Linda Clowwitter and things to start to develop the program, so hoping that.
That'll start in earnest this summer and then definitely the fall, so that, parents know exactly what they're looking at for the fall of 2013 as well as staff.
very good.
And still no word on the early childhood grant.
No, I haven't had I was going to try and call the CDB today, but I was very busy. But yeah, nothing on any websites anywhere to give us any indication. And
I think they're distracted with the transportation discussion right now, whether or not they're going to reimburse districts for transportation. So.
Nice.
Okay. All right, then, are there any public comments? All right, are there any board reports?
Nothing from me.
It's Teacher Appreciation Week.
Teacher appreciation.
We appreciate the teachers very much.
Yes. Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session to discuss collective bargaining and personnel issues.
So moved?
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McLean.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
And there will not be a vote after close.
Thanks. Have a good summer, Mike.